2 Kings chapter 20. We are still in the life and in the reign of Hezekiah. Now, last week we finished up chapter 19 where we saw that Hezekiah had gone into the house of the Lord and he laid out what was taking place, what he had received from Sennacherib's men, the king of Assyria. And God made sure that Hezekiah knew he was going to take care of him, that he was going to deliver him. And even though Sennacherib had Hezekiah shut up like a bird in a cage surrounding the city of Jerusalem, Sennacherib never made an attack on Jerusalem. Because as we saw at the end of 2 Kings chapter 19, in one night, the angel of the Lord came in and took out 185,000 of the Assyrian army. And so when the rest of them who were there got up the next morning, it did not take much for them to realize, we've got to get out of here. And so they fled, went back, and then we saw what happened to Sennacherib. And now when we move into chapter 20, we're going to see some more about Hezekiah's life and some more about his reign. It can be a challenge at times because of the way that we often think about history. And I know I've brought this up before, but the way we think about history is usually more linear and kind of chronological, that this event happened and then this event followed by this event and this event. Whereas the way that we see it laid out in Hebrew history is a lot of times it's overlapping. And so we might look at chapter 20 and think to ourselves, well, this is happening after the events of chapter 19. But really, more than likely, what's happening is this is going to be taking place even before some of the things in chapter 19 and the way that it all lays out. And I'll try to bring some of that out of how we can see that within the chapter itself. But as we look at more of Hezekiah's reign, the first thing we see about it here in chapter 20 is going to be in verses 1 through 11, where we're going to see his extension, that Hezekiah is going to receive an extension on his life. But let's start out with verse 1, if somebody would read for us. 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 1, and we'll see about his sickness.
In those days, Hezekiah was sick and near death, and Isaiah, the prophet, the son of Amoz, went to him and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live."
So it starts out by saying in those days to kind of give a time frame. And again, that's one of those that can be a little confusing because in our minds that could mean, okay, so this is in those days meaning like after that, or is this in those days meaning like during the same general time frame? And really that's what it seems to be. Even maybe again a little bit before some of it, because once you get down to verse 6, and you kind of look in the middle of verse 6, it talks about how God says, "I'll deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria." And so that's how we know that what's taking place here is happening at least toward the beginning of Sennacherib's pursuit on Jerusalem. But during that time, Hezekiah was sick, and his sickness was not a minor thing, was it? Because his sickness brought him near to what? Near to death. So this is a rough sickness that Hezekiah is dealing with. We don't really know what exactly this sickness was. When you get into verse 7, it talks about this particular boil that he had. So that's really the only sign of like what he was specifically dealing with was some type of a boil. Maybe there was more than one. Maybe it was one that just got very badly infected. Whatever the case was, Sennacherib was sick, and he was sick unto death. And who is it that comes to Hezekiah during this sickness? Isaiah. And the message that Isaiah brought to Hezekiah was probably one that he did not really look forward to taking to Hezekiah. Because what was Isaiah's message from the Lord?
Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live.
And when it talks about setting your house in order, from what I understand, that's talking about something much more immediate. It's more than just kind of like, hey, go ahead and make sure you have everything in place. But even thinking specifically for Hezekiah as a king, what was it going to be important that he did before his death? He needed to make sure there was going to be another king, right? He needed to make sure that he was going to go ahead and name which of his sons was going to replace him on the throne. You think even about what David was doing at the end of his life and why it was so urgent that the people came to him, because David needed to make sure that he named Solomon to be his successor. And so you can see the same thing playing out. Isaiah is coming to Hezekiah, telling Hezekiah, make sure everything is in order. Make sure even within that you have a successor lined out, because you shall die and not live. Does not give Hezekiah much hope, does it? But we're going to see how Hezekiah responds in the next couple of verses. Somebody read verses 2 and 3 now.
Then he turned his face towards the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying, remember now, O Lord, I pray, how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart, and I have done what's good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly.
After Isaiah had brought this message to Hezekiah, we know based on verse 4 that Isaiah had left, and of course, you probably would not want to stick around much longer after you just tell him that you're about to die, because Isaiah is the last person Hezekiah would have wanted to see. And in fact, Hezekiah didn't really want to see anyone at this time, because what does he do? He turns his face to the wall. From what I've gathered is that's kind of a showing of his desire to just be alone. That he didn't really want to be around others, and also in recognizing that he does not immediately go to others. He doesn't go to his family. He doesn't go to his advisors. He doesn't go to the people. But instead, where does he go? He goes to the Lord. We've noted, going through that Hezekiah is a good king. He had the moments where he faltered, yes, and we're going to see that again before we reach the end of chapter 20. But right here is one of the shining moments in Hezekiah's life. Hezekiah handles this situation, and he handles this very difficult news that he has received in the right way. He turns to the Lord. He turns to the one who actually sent the message, sent this diagnosis or prognosis through Isaiah. Hezekiah goes to the Lord and prays to him. And in praying to the Lord, what did Hezekiah specifically note in his prayer? First of all, he calls on God to do what? Based on the first couple words of verse 3.
Remember?
To remember, right? Don't forget. Don't forget, Lord, remember. And in doing this, it's also a little bit of a moment of reassurance and opportunity to build a little bit of confidence and strength, at least in Hezekiah, to say, okay, I know that I've not received this sickness because of any sort of sin or anything like that in my life. You think about going back to the book of Job, and why was it that Job's friends were convinced that all these bad things were happening to Job, even losing his good health?
They thought he'd sinned.
The friends were convinced it's because of sin. Even you get into the time of the New Testament, and the reference escapes me right now, but thinking about when Jesus would go to the man who was born blind, and the question is asked of Jesus, well, did he sin or did his parents sin? So saying all of this to say, there was a pretty consistent thought process that poor health or unfortunate things in life were a direct result of sin. Sometimes it very well could be. But at least right now for Hezekiah, Hezekiah knows, well, that's not the case. So, Lord, remember me. And then he goes on and he talks about his faithfulness. He's praying to the Lord to remember how it is that he had walked before him in truth and with a loyal heart. In other words, he was faithful. And how he had done, he goes on in verse 3, what was good in your sight. That all that Hezekiah had done was in an effort to be pleasing to God. That he wanted to be right, he wanted to be true to him. And again, this is Hezekiah not just asking the Lord to remember it, but it's also Hezekiah's way and even of reminding himself. And that can be something that's very important, because it might be in that moment, if we're like Hezekiah, that maybe we start to kind of doubt things ourselves. But Hezekiah knows. Hezekiah is sure. And we can be sure of our relationship with God as well, and we can find confidence in that. Not confidence that our works are what are going to save us, because it's God's grace that saves us, but confidence in knowing that He's got it all under His hand, that we've been faithful to Him, and that He's going to take care of us in the end. So Jared's hand, and I'll come back to you then, Johnny.
Give me the reference, John 9.
Okay, John 9 for that man born blind. Thank you. And so, yeah, just again to see it from like the earliest point in the Old Testament, the book of Job is most likely kind of time frame wise among the earliest. I mean, it's obviously not earlier than the first chapters of Genesis, but you're talking in a very similar time frame to Abraham because of how everything is with the patriarchal system. So from like the very earliest point in history, even up to the days of Jesus, that was the thought process. So yeah, John 9. Thank you. Johnny?
Just going to say, this could sort of tie in with his taking the letter to the temple
Mm-hmm.
and spreading it before God. It was,
Yes.
he was having this mindset.
Yes.
Change of
Very much so. Yeah, to see, as Johnny was mentioning there, thinking about some similarity to when in chapter 19 he would take the letter and lay it out before the Lord in the temple, because that's really what he's doing here. He's laying out his situation. It's very possible he could have said more within the prayer, but even right here, it's just a very, very short prayer if we look at it here in 2 Kings is the way it's recorded. Because even if you look at this right here, New King James has this in one sentence. A one-sentence prayer. A one-sentence prayer that we're going to see is going to add 15 years to his life in the next couple of verses. One sentence did that. Now, chances are there's a lot more that Hezekiah wanted to say, but a lot more that he just couldn't get out to say. We don't have time really to go into all of it, and it's been a little bit, but we have looked at it in these classes. But if you think about Romans chapter 8 and around verse 26, 27, with the Holy Spirit and the help that the Spirit gives, and maybe this is kind of perhaps a little bit of an indication of what some of that could be. That there's more that Hezekiah wanted to say, he just couldn't say it, didn't know how to say it, didn't know how to express it. Because Hezekiah doesn't really even ask for anything in the prayer, does he, other than just remember. He never expressly says, take the poor health away and give me good health. Right? He never says, don't let me die from this. All he says is, remember. But then we're going to see what happens and how the Lord is going to respond to this particular prayer. But we can also think about our response to situations that come up in life. Because of everywhere that Hezekiah could have gone, Hezekiah went to the Lord. But it's important for us to think about ourselves as well and how we're going to respond. It may not be that we're faced with the same type of an outlook that Hezekiah received, that our passing is imminent, and that we need to make sure that everything is in order in our house. But it very well could be. There could be a health diagnosis that's given that doesn't look very positive, that things may be closer than what we wish that they were. It may be something else. It may not be health related, but it might be job related. It might be family related. Whatever it is, whenever we're faced with a negative outlook, how should we respond?
Take it to the Lord in prayer.
Take it to the Lord in prayer, right? That to realize that He's the one who's in control, that He's the one who has all of these things in His hand. So often our immediate thought is going to be, well, no, okay, I need a second opinion, right? I need to go to a different doctor and see what they say. Or I need to go to my family. I need to go to my friends. I need to go tell all of these people. But how often is it in the moment that we would even think to just stop right then and there and take it to the Lord? And it's not that that's not always on our mind, but more often than not, probably we think, if we're honest, we think that where we need to go first is, to family, to friends, to all of these people. And then at the end of the day, before we go to bed, well, then I'll take it to the Lord in prayer. But what's Hezekiah do? Hezekiah immediately goes to the Lord in prayer. And again, it's not a long and a lengthy thing. Hezekiah doesn't really seem to say, well, I need to get all of this straight in my head before, I do anything about it. No, the text indicates that Hezekiah just kind of receives the message from Isaiah. I'm sure there may well have been some other words exchanged. But what it seems like is Hezekiah just kind of turns to the wall and then immediately is praying to God. Now, when we look at that, I think that's a very good lesson and a very good example for us to follow. And you know, the thing about whenever we talk about these things, it's always easy to say, or it's easier, I guess I should say, easier to say what we would do, what we should do in the situation. But when the situation comes, that's when it gets more of a challenge. What are we actually going to do when faced with that situation? Are we going to respond in the right way, or instead are we going to respond in a different way? Did I see your hand, Johnny?
I was just gonna say, we need to realize that God knows everything. So we
Mhm.
don't have to give every little minute detail when we talk to him. We just need to, express our desire and what we're needing.
We don't have to have it.
That is-
We don't have to have it all figured out in our head, right? Because we're not going to. And as soon as we think we do, we're going to realize we really don't. And that's if I can be honest, that's a hard thing for me, is I like to try to have everything kind of figured out already in my head and have a plan in place. But your point's exactly right, Johnny. We don't have to do that in prayer because God already knows. God already has it figured out. We just need to go to him with what it is that's worrying us, what it is that's on our mind, whatever that is, be it the health issue, be it the job issue, the family issue, whatever. We don't have to have it figured out because we know the one who does, and we know the one who can handle it. And even though it looked impossible for Hezekiah, again, in the next few verses, we're going to see just how quickly that can change. But what if he hadn't prayed? What if he hadn't gone to God? And so, very, very good thought. Jared?
Just as much as turning in and praying, I think the attitude and the heart needs to be in the right place also. Because you can turn to God and pray and be in complete panic, almost expressing the idea that you don't know how he's going to be able to handle this. And you can go to that prayer in the same sense, fully confident that you're talking to the Creator who can do something about this, who can work in your life. So it's just as much as going to him in prayer, also the proper attitude and heart behind the prayer.
And some look at this and say, well, this is a sign of Hezekiah's pride. Because when you get a little bit further in the chapter, you see that Hezekiah has a pride problem. But right here, it really does not seem to be pride on Hezekiah's part. To Jared's point, it seems much more of confidence in God, that God knows who Hezekiah is. God knows the life Hezekiah has lived. And we know it's not going to be any sort of a sinful pride or anything like that because of how God responds in the next few verses here. But when it comes to prayers, Jared's bringing up, we can have confidence in God. We can come before him. How is it that Hebrews 4:15 and 16 word it? Hebrews 4:15 talks about how we have Jesus as a high priest. He can sympathize with our weaknesses, tempted in all points as we are, yet without sin. But then you look at Hebrews 4 and verse 16. Therefore let us come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find, or we may obtain help and find mercy and grace and comfort in time of need. Right there it tells us that we can confidently come before the throne of God. We can boldly come before the throne of God for help. And is that not what Hezekiah is doing right here in 2 Kings chapter 20? Confidently coming before God, confidence in who he is before God. Not any sort of a sinful pride that he's showing, but showing that he's lived right with God, he's in a right relationship with God, and he knows that God can handle it. He's not making any sort of a selfish demand from God. Again, you look at what specifically Hezekiah is praying. Remember. That's the only ask. He's not telling God what to do about the situation. He's just simply asking God to remember. Remember his faithfulness and remember how it is that he has striven to do what is right with God. So let's move in then to the next few verses here, where we'll look at the Lord's answer. Somebody read for us 2 Kings chapter 20, verses 4 through 7.
It happened before Isaiah had gone out into the middle court, that the word of the Lord came to him, saying, return and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of David your father, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears, surely I will heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord, and I will add to your days 15 years. I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. Then Isaiah said, take a lump of figs. So they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered.
You look at verse 4 as Johnny read, and it tells us that it happened before Isaiah had even gone out into the middle court. Might be a little hard to see depending on where you're sitting, but this is basically a layout of, so this is the best I could find of Solomon's temple and Solomon's house. And so it would have been essentially the same layout now in the days of Hezekiah. But up at the top, that's the temple and everything. And then you come down here, here's the house, and then here's the court. And so you look at what the text says, and it's before Isaiah ever had actually gotten into the court. So Isaiah is probably somewhere either still in the house, maybe on a bottom floor or something. Maybe he's sort of in the in-between area. But before Isaiah had gotten into the court, what happens? God answers, and God tells Isaiah, go back in there. Go back in there and tell Hezekiah, I've heard, and you're about to get 15 years added to your life. And there's my paraphrase for you. But you look at that and you think about what that's showing. That shows just how quickly and just how immediately Hezekiah went to the Lord in prayer, because it's not a long drawn-out process, and it's not like Isaiah had even gotten out of the temple complex yet. No, he had not even got to the court, right? He's still right there in the house, and the prayer has already gone to God, and God has already heard it, and God is already answering it. You think about how quickly prayer works. Now, in our lives, it's not that we always see the immediate response like that. Sometimes maybe we do see a pretty quick response from God to our prayers. Sometimes the prayers we may not see the response to until years down the road. But nonetheless, it shows us that God is listening, God is paying attention, and God is responsive. You think about just how powerful Hezekiah's prayer is. If you just look and you read, not thinking about any of the context, but you just look at verse 3 and you just read, remember now, O Lord, I pray, how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart and have done what was good in your sight. If all you do is read that and separate any of that from the context, would any of us say that's one of the most powerful prayers in the Bible? Probably not. Because if we were just trying to look at the words of a prayer and determine what's one of the most powerful prayers in the Bible, we would probably be expecting to find a prayer like the scribes or the Pharisees that's probably a pretty lengthy reading, that probably has some words that we're going to have to break our dictionaries out for, right? That there's going to be a lot in there, because that sometimes in our minds is what a good prayer is. But that's not how Hezekiah prays, is it? This is a short and a very simple prayer. But does that change the impact of the prayer? Sometimes maybe we think to ourselves, well, I don't need to pray for it. I can't really pray for it because I'm just not that good with my words. That maybe we think, well, I can't, get a prayer out that's longer than 15 seconds. How long does it take to say, remember now, O Lord, I pray, how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart and have done what was good in your sight? It doesn't take more than 15 seconds, does it? But how many years are added to Hezekiah's life because of this prayer? Let's never think that our prayers are not powerful because we can't get, an abundance of words out, or because our vocabulary is not that large. That's not what prayer is about. Back to Johnny's point from earlier, prayer is about just laying it out before the Lord. It's about opening up our heart before the Lord. I think I can say it. I told him when he was here, but he's not here now, so he can't get red in the face. But Kyle, when Kyle was here, one of the things that I always told Kyle that I appreciated whenever it was that he would serve and he would pray is just how simple his prayers were and how honest they were. That he wasn't trying to be anything that he wasn't before God, because as Kyle himself would tell me, well, God already knows who I am. God already knows. So you got to be honest with him. And he didn't try to change anything in it. He was just honest in communicating with God. He didn't try to do a long prayer. He didn't try to, go to the thesaurus for everything. But he was just who he was. And that's what God wants. For us to just be who we are in our prayers to him. He doesn't expect for all of us to pray in the exact same way, using the exact same formula. He doesn't expect all of us to be using the same type of language and the same type of phrases that we probably don't really fully understand what the phrases are, but we hear them all the time. No, God just wants us to be honest and to lay it out before him. And again, it does not have to be, an entire chapter book. It doesn't have to be a short story. It can just be one simple sentence. And see how that changed Hezekiah's life. See how that changed the life and the course of the nation. All Hezekiah prayed for was remember me. And how does the Lord respond and answer the prayer? He tells him, verse 5, I have heard you. I have seen your tears. Surely I will heal you. Now that's certainly what would have been on Hezekiah's mind, is this healing. But you think about the comfort and the confidence. God says, I've heard. You may not have said much, but I heard every word of it. I've seen the way this is affecting you. I've seen your tears through this. And how many tears had he really shed at this point? Now, perhaps within this is thinking about more of the tears that Hezekiah had shed before Isaiah came to him. But the only record we have of this is now that Isaiah has come, now we're seeing this. So could be more of the tears shed before, but perhaps it's just the little bit of tears that he shed since he received this diagnosis. And remember, it's not been a long time, because Isaiah hasn't even made it out into the court yet. He's not made it to the middle of the court. And so, God has heard, God has seen, and God says, I will heal. But that's not all. Because he goes on and he gives some requirements, some stipulation to Hezekiah. On the third day, go to the house of the Lord. And then the Lord says, I will add to your days 15 years. 15 years to Hezekiah's life because of a short little prayer. But there was more that God was going to do, wasn't there? Because what else does the Lord say he's going to do?
Save the city.
He's going to save the city. That the king of Assyria is not going to attack. The king of Assyria is not going to be successful. That's not what Hezekiah was praying for initially. But sometimes the blessings that come in prayer are not always the ones we were expecting. We don't always know how one blessing might impact another. We don't always know the snowball effect that it might create. That it was just one short, simple prayer that adds 15 years to Hezekiah's life and saves the city of Jerusalem during his lifetime. That's powerful. And look again at Hezekiah's prayer. Nothing fancy about it. Nothing eloquent. No words that none of us could come up with. Right? You don't have to have a huge education to understand that. A simple prayer. A simple prayer that had such an amazing change in Hezekiah's life and even saves the nation. Hopefully we can all find encouragement in that. To know that our prayers, no matter how short, no matter how simple, they're powerful. And hopefully that's motivation that we continue praying, that we continue communicating with and taking all of these things to God. But let's think for a second, too, about Isaiah. If you think about Isaiah, How do you think he may have been feeling through some of this? He was just in the room with Hezekiah, and what had he just told Hezekiah? You're going to die. And then Isaiah doesn't even make it hardly out of the house, right? He's not even made it into the court, so he's somewhere in the in-between area, hardly gotten out of there, and now what does the Lord say? Go back in there. Do you think Hezekiah was going to want to see Isaiah? Probably not. If we had been Isaiah, do you think we would have been really excited to go back in there?
Not at all.
Probably not. But what did Isaiah do? Isaiah went back in there. Think about Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8. When the Lord needed a man who would stand up and speak for him, when he needed someone to go for him, what did Isaiah say? Here am I, send me. Right? That wasn't just a one-time thing for Isaiah, but that was something throughout Isaiah's life and throughout Isaiah's ministry. That if the Lord sent, Isaiah was going to go. We don't always necessarily look here in 2 Kings 20 and think about Isaiah through all of it, but don't forget that Isaiah was there too. Don't forget that Isaiah would have had some feelings and emotions behind all of this as well. And Isaiah, as difficult as it would have been, was willing to go back in there and to, within who knows how much time. If we were to say within 10 or 15 minutes, that's probably still a pretty generous amount of time. But even within that short frame of time that very likely would have been much shorter, Isaiah's already going back in and saying, you know what I told you earlier? The Lord has heard you. The Lord has seen your tears. And the Lord is surely going to heal you. And you know the way that you've been worried and you're not really sure how you're going to handle the Assyrians? You don't need to worry about that. Because the Lord's also going to save you and the city from their hands as well. And all Hezekiah prayed was for the Lord to remember. It took him less than 10, 15 seconds. Short prayer, huge impact. Jared?
Seems like Isaiah would have left with his head kind of hanging after verse 1.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he got that next message, probably pretty excited
Yeah.
to go back and actually have the good news to share.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd be pretty excited about it. I can only imagine, but it seemed like it would.
Because he delivered one message saying you're gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been
10,
hard.
15 minutes later, he goes back, well, the Lord said that you're not gonna die if you do this.
Yeah.
Because there's stipulations in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's still something Hezekiah was going to have to do, and we'll see him follow through here in a second, but that's a good point to bring up. I hadn't really thought about that as much with Isaiah. I had actually something here in my notes about Hezekiah on that. But yeah, thinking about Isaiah, to go from, in one moment, having to deliver devastating news, to then almost immediately turning around with some wonderful, like extremely joyous news. That's an emotional roller coaster right there. Sometimes, whenever it is that you are carrying the message of the Lord, that comes with a lot of emotion. Sometimes you have to deliver devastating news like that. But other times, you get to deliver the greatest news that there is. Isaiah got to do all of it right there. And so you think about his emotion, but even think about the roller coaster for Hezekiah. Hezekiah receives the news from Isaiah, and you can just kind of picture him. You think about Psalm 23, because even you think Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And you think about the imagery when it gets down to, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Well, if Hezekiah, which it very much seems to be the case, was faithful to the Lord, despite his now, in a very real sense, being in the valley of the shadow of death, right there on death's door, he could still have confidence in the Lord, but it didn't change the human emotion that he had. And so even through that, now he goes from being way down in the depths, in the valley of the shadow of death, to where do you think he was after Isaiah brings back the good news? Way up on the mountaintop. It's an emotional roller coaster. Maybe we've been there in our life, where we've been way down at the bottom, And then it doesn't take a long time before we suddenly find ourselves up at the top of the mountain. But just because we're at the top of the mountain doesn't mean we may not end up again down in the valley. But being in the valley doesn't mean we'll never find ourselves back up on the mountain again. So much that we can learn from it. So much for us to consider through it all. I had a question in there. We kind of discussed it. But thinking about the snowball effect of the blessings, and I want to at least try to get through this portion before Lucas rings the second bell on us here in a few minutes. So let's just move in then to verses 8 through 11, where we'll see the Lord's assurance. Somebody read verses 8 through 11.
Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "What is the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord on the third day?" Then Isaiah said, "This is the sign to you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing which he has spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees, or go backward 10 degrees? And Hezekiah answered, "It's an easy thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. No, but let the shadow go backward 10 degrees." So Isaiah the prophet cried out to the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down on the sundial of Ahaz.
And so we saw from the response of the Lord going back into the previous section how it was according to verse 5, that on the third day Isaiah was to go to the house of the Lord. And now Isaiah is basically saying, okay, well, how do I know all of these things are going to happen? How do I know that just when I go on the third day to the house of the Lord, everything will be good? I'm going to make sure that I have the additional 15 years, because he was already going to see the response of the healing and the immediacy of it when Isaiah takes the lump of figs and lays it on the boil and he recovered. So he already sees that. The health is getting there, but now how do I know that the Lord is going to bless me with an additional 15 years? How do I know that the Lord is going to save us from the Assyrians? Hezekiah is asking for a sign, and Isaiah tells him what the sign is going to be, that he's going to go to the house of the Lord on the third day, that all of these things are going to be so. And so Isaiah tells him what the sign's going to be. The Lord's going to do what shall be spoken, and he asks him, is the shadow going to go forward 10 degrees or go backward 10 degrees? Hezekiah's response is basically just, well, it's an easy thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees, right? That's just the passing of time. That's an easy thing. It doesn't really take anything, because that's how time works. But to go the other direction, that requires some divine intervention, right? That's what Hezekiah wants to see, to know. And sure enough, well, guess what? The Lord can do it. He brought the shadow back 10 degrees where it had gone down on the sundial of Ahaz. I think some translations may say on the steps of Ahaz, but basically whatever it was something that King Ahaz had built that at least showed this progression of time. And so with this, what we see is that God was able to essentially turn back the clock. And if God could turn back the clock in that moment, then surely he could add the 15 years to Hezekiah's life. More confidence that he would have been given. And so you think about Hezekiah. Hezekiah had found himself weeping bitterly at the start of the chapter. You think about the tears that he would have been in at the start. But now think about the tears of joy that he was in at the end. And so we see Hezekiah's extension to his life. So that will go ahead and finish up this first section of chapter 20. And then, Lord willing, next week, we'll pick up here in the middle of 2 Kings 20, and we'll look at the Babylonian visitors that come starting in verse 12.